Hello, Oswego City School District. My name is Dr. Mathis Kelvin, for those of you who don't know me, and I am the Superintendent of Schools for the Oswego City School District. So earlier this week, the Board of Education and I met along with our attorneys and architectural firm to discuss a concern that we are working through that involves our capital construction project. The specific concern that was discussed involves contaminated soils that we found in the Wilber Field area, which runs between Buck Boulevard and Turrell Street. To assist me today, I have invited several representatives from our architectural firm, King & King, Mr. Craig Daly and Mr. Jim King. And together, they are going to answer questions about this concern along with me. So throughout this video, I'm going to be asking a series of questions that you might have, and together, we again will be answering those questions for you. So to begin, I think what we're going to do is just start with our questions, and we're going to start talking a little bit about when we kind of learned of things. So the first question that I'm going to ask is, when was the issue discovered by the school district and its consultants? And if you gentlemen can share with us when things were discovered, that would be great.
Okay. We discovered the condition approximately around June 1st of this year during the excavation work associated with the floodplain development. The floodplain area takes up the old Wilber Field from Turrell to Buck Boulevard, and this specific location was discovered closer to Turrell Street, approximately 4 feet below grade.
Great. Thank you, Craig. So in terms of the materials that were found, can you share with us, please, what those materials specifically are that were found in this area?
Sure. Mathis, the materials were really characterized as what you would consider heavy metals. So there was lead, barium, mercury, and arsenic. And it was the lead that seemed to have, in that initial area, the highest concentration.
Great. Thank you. And just again, to be clear, so the area where these materials were located at again, just can you tell us that again? I think you just started touching on that.
Sure. As Craig mentioned, as we were excavating, the contractors were excavating and digging down to create the new floodplain as required by the city of Oswego. The material was found approximately 4 feet below the existing field elevation. So 4 feet below the existing grass that existed before the construction started.
Great, great. Now, I'm sure some people may have questions around health risk. So can you just share a little bit about the health risk, if any, that are associated with these materials?
Well, they're considered hazardous materials, especially the lead, as people are probably more familiar with it as lead-based paint products in homes and how carefully those things need to be dealt with. The materials that are there are basically, as Jim stated, the lead, the barium, arsenic materials. They're kind of held within the soils. So really the only way that this would be an issue is if they would be consumed, ingested, if someone was to eat a considerable amount of this product, or as well as inhaled if people were breathing in a considerable amount of dust generated from this product.
Great. So I'm sure in terms of safety that several from our community are certainly going to be wondering about the safety around this whole concern. So I think the first thing I'd like to just ask about is the area safe in the meantime? Can you just share a little bit about the safety piece?
Sure.
In the meantime?
First of all, the entire area where these materials have been discovered has been fenced. And obviously, if you drive by down Hillside or Buck Boulevard, you see a fence around this construction area. All of the drainage structures that are within that area that are either complete or partially complete have been protected, as is normal with any construction activity, to keep any soil materials from running into the storm system. So those have been protected. And the entire site is under a stormwater pollution prevention permit requirement, which requires the site to be monitored, dust be kept down, so the site has been wet to keep, as Craig said, so that people aren't breathing dust. All of those are for protection of not only the contractors, but anybody in the surrounding community. So right now the site is very safe. In addition to that, the Oswego City Police Department, Fire Department, and others have been notified to continue to watch the site to make sure people aren't going in just because they're curious and wondering what's going on. The construction manager at the end of each day is walking the perimeter and checking the fence to make sure all gates and openings are secure. So that's regularly happen every day at the end of the day.
Great, great. So thank you very much, Jim. Just in terms of the runoffs from the site, have they been tested as well?
Yes, we are continuing to do testing on them as well periodically. Currently, we've completed 3 tests over the span of the project, just to confirm that the materials are not leaching into the water and therefore into the groundwater or stormwater system. All of those tests came back negative. There's been no leaching of material into the groundwater. We're confident there won't be, but we're going to continue to do that just so we can maintain that type of protocol and safety measure for the district and the community.
Great. So certainly there's some assurances with respect to the surrounding groundwater piece there as well.
I think, Mathis, I could just add another comment
Sure,
to that
go right
question
ahead.
about the groundwater. Craig mentioned earlier that these heavy metals are typically, when they're found in soils like we have here on the old Wilber Field, they're tightly bound to the soil. So the soil also would have to be leaving the site as well as the runoff to pull the metals with it. And again, I mentioned the SWIP, the State Water Pollution Prevention Plan, that also is in place to keep soils with or without metals off and out of the storm and groundwater system.
That's great. So I'm sure people may have a question about, we've got this new turf field that's kind of it's pretty much almost complete. And I'm sure some folks may wonder, are any of these materials under the turf field at all?
There is none of this material under the turf field. As I stated, we discovered this approximately 4 feet below grade when we started our work for the floodplain. We'd already basically completed the work at the high school stadium, or at least the majority of that work, to a point where we never experienced any of the sightings or this suspect material during the excavation work for that. So we are confident that there's no material under the new turf field. Also to note, the turf field is elevated approximately 4 to 5 feet above the existing level of that field, the previous baseball fields. So there's a considerable amount of clean fill material above that if there was anything, it's more than an adequate buffer for that purpose.
Great. Thank you very much, Craig. So when something like this happens, there are folks that you need to report this information to. So if you can just share information around who the school district has reported this issue to, and then what agencies oversee the removal and the proper disposal of the materials as well.
Sure. When the material was first discovered, as Craig discussed, at the north end of the old Wilber Field near Turtle Street, we immediately had it tested, understood what it was, and started conversations with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, the local authorities, just to get their take on it and get them to understand what was taking place. They understood it. They said it would be a normal construction site type of cleanup, and we have continued that conversation throughout the process of determining the best ways to remediate the issue. We also had conversations with the State Education Department, who is really the authority having jurisdiction over any capital construction project on a school site. And so they are fully aware of what's happening, and they have been very collaborative in our efforts to bring this to conclusion and get the project complete to the original specifications.
That's great. So some people may be wondering about what happened possibly before, and I'm just, in terms of a question, next question is about, why were the contaminated soils not found before the construction? Can you just share a little bit about that?
Sure. That's a very good question. I mean, why wouldn't we notice that? And I would have to say, number one, just its location below grade and in an area that was not scheduled to be heavily developed. We did what was standard operating procedure for development of the land of the floodplain area, which was what we call geotechnical engineering. We did soil borings at certain locations to determine the type of soil that we were going into, the groundwater table location, the percolation, how the soils will absorb, and kind of the structural capacities of the soil if we were to put fields and things onto it in order to guide the design of that work. We did the geotechnical report and reviewed that, and there was nothing suspect discovered through those borings. So we were not alerted until we had a massive exposure when we excavated out and noticed there was a large area of this, that there was anything suspect to even consider looking at. We also look at the records of the history of the site, and we go back as far as the 60s and all the way back to the 40s, and this was basically an open field. So we weren't concerned, or there was no historical data to show that there was maybe a gas station or anything else that would have kind of prompted us to do additional types of testing. So this was just one of those things that we discovered when we discovered it.
Great. Thank you very much, Craig. So some may be concerned about the floodplain. And the question that I would have is, could the floodplain be relocated to an area not affected by the contaminated soils?
Mathis, that's a great question. Unfortunately, and for those people, and you are all familiar with the flooding that has occurred recently, even as late as I think last spring or maybe a year ago spring, in that Hillside, is it Liberty Street intersection? Mm-hmm. And that really essentially, if you tried to move the floodplain, it's certainly possible. However, the floodplain needs to be within the area that the flooding occurs. So we can't take it and move it 6 blocks up the road, because it needs to be on contiguous acreage with where it happens. So because, as Craig mentioned, we filled that corner where the old baseball fields are with the new turf field and stadium, we raised that area 3 or 4 feet above the original grade to bring it out of the floodplain. But by itself, that would cause the water that would normally accumulate in that corner to spread out over the neighboring properties, which is why the city of Oswego has required that the district build the floodplain, replace that raised area with an area lowered of equivalent volume on the school's property. So within the site is where the floodplain needs to be developed, because it's contiguous to where the flooding happens. So there really isn't any other way, unless you wanted to go out and try to buy additional surrounding community-owned property, which is really not feasible within the time frame within which we need to get the project developed and the floodplain developed. So it's not a issue in the next spring when potentially there's a rainy season and snow melt causes that flooding to happen again. So it was a great question. I think it was asked by one of the board members. It's just not possible.
Mm-hmm. Right. Great.
Has to be on that property.
That's great. Thank you very much, Jim. So can you just share a little bit about the plan to remediate the site? I'm certain that there's some from our community who want to know, so what's the details in terms of how we're going to remediate the site?
Okay. Well, the approach that we're taking is a New York State DEC approved remediation approach for what they call capping a material of concern. In this case, we're talking about the lead and metals that we've discovered. The intent of our work is we're going to remove approximately a 2-foot layer of the contaminated soils for the whole dimension of the field and replace it with 2 feet of clean material. So to make sure it's clear that we're not removing all of the material down and providing a clean site. We are providing a cap. To put that in perspective, if this material was discovered on an industrial or a commercial development site, it probably wouldn't be managed at all. But as this is a school site and that we are putting practice fields on this location where kids will be playing, this is the approach that would be required to protect anybody, occupants on that field that are going to be on for any period of a safe barrier between a contaminant and the play surface where they are.
Great. So when do we, what's the time frame that's involved in terms of when will the work be completed? Can you share a little bit about when do we think it'll be completed?
Yes. Right now, we're working through the final design details in terms of the plan that Craig just outlined. And those design documents and construction documents will be put out to bid. We hope to have bids from, we've identified 6 or 7 contractors that have the type of experience necessary to do this type of remediation. We expect those bids to be received and that the work would be completed between, we say now and prior to the next potential flood season in the spring of 2021. As far as time frame, we've estimated with the help of the construction managers that the work should be able to be done in 4 to 6 weeks, but we've allocated 8 or so weeks in the schedule to make sure that it's done in timeliness and in the appropriate time prior to that flood season in the spring of next year. Right. And it is work that can be done in the winter season because they're using large grading and earth moving equipment, and even the little bit of snow that you get in Oswego on occasion won't slow them down too much.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if it's a little bit of snow.
That's a tongue-in-cheek comment, Mathis.
Absolutely.
Even if it's 6 feet, well, they'll keep moving.
That's great. So tell us about the cost for the remediation. Certainly there's a cost for this work, and if we can just talk a little bit about the cost.
Sure. The project costs are estimated at a not to exceed value of $5.6 million. And yes, that is a very large amount of money. But you have to consider the work that's involved with this and the handling that goes into managing this. The 2 foot of soil we're removing is not just put into a truck and hauled away. That material needs to be treated with a binding agent. And the reason we're using a binding agent, even though the heavy metals and materials stick to the soil, the binding agent provides a little additional measure to make sure those metals do not leave the soils. This is part of a requirement for a lot of landfills that will take this material in, that this agent be added, and the agent is an expensive material. So basically we remove the soil, we treat it with this binding agent, which is a mixing process. We have to test that material to make sure it is performing the way it is meant to perform. And then we are able to put that into the trucks and haul it off to landfill, where they treat it as a material fill product going into their landfill process. The other issue with the cost of this is the time it's going to take. Even though this work will probably be expedited the best we can with the contractors, the landfills can only take so much of the material on a daily basis. So even though, for example, just as a number game, if a landfill can take 1,000 tons of this material, but our contractors are able to generate 2,000 tons of material a day, you can see that there's a little discrepancy in the flow of the material off-site. So that kind of extends the timeline a little bit. Time is money, and therefore it becomes kind of a costly process. We are, with our engineers in the city of Oswego, looking at options to how we can maybe modify the floodplain, as well as modify the design of the work to minimize the cost, to stay below that $5.6 million threshold. And we're also looking at investing a little bit more in the testing and sampling process, so that we're not necessarily treating soils that are not required to be treated. We projected that we would run into this material throughout the field, but as you can see from some of the previous figures or pictures, it's up and down in concentrations across the field. So some of those lower concentrations may not require this, and there's savings there if we do not have to treat that and handle it as a hazardous material.
So thanks, Craig. So I know there are some people who are probably wondering, so who's going to pay for this remediation cost? Like, who's going to do it? So just to be clear, the district is the owner of the field, and the officials are, we are, as the leaders of the district, We're working really closely with the New York State Ed Department to use existing approved capital project funds to complete the remedial work that needs to take place. So in terms of the cost, that's our plan in terms of how we will cover it. So I guess in terms of my next question, will the school district waive the apprenticeship program for the emergency remedial work project? And before I let the gentleman answer that, we just want people to know that our board and the district really does appreciate and recognize apprenticeship programs, and we celebrate those tremendously. Now, with respect to the project, can you just talk a little bit about the apprenticeship programs there?
Sure. I just want to make also clear that waiving the apprenticeship program or apprenticeship requirement is not an exclusion of our labor union companies being able to bid this. The reason for suggesting that we waive it is, number one, due to its emergency nature and the time to get the available contractors to participate. Also that there's limited knowledge on the pro local union or union represented owned primary contractor, site contractor to be able to perform this specialized work, because it is managing materials that are hazardous and have landfill experience. It's also a means of opening up competition, because that way we not only have union-based companies bidding, we also have non-union companies that have the experience and are responsible to be able to participate in that. But we want to make clear it doesn't exclude unions from being able to bid this project. And as a matter of fact, the previous phase, we had a non-union subcontractor for the site construction win the project, but the majority of their work was performed by union firms, such as Shenango Forks, who did the turf field. So it's not exclusionary, it's just meant to open up competition, provide the best number, and to manage the emergency conditions to be able to expedite this and make sure we're doing our due diligence to fiduciary stewardship of the funds.
Right. But and just to be clear, so the district is going to be waiving the apprenticeship program piece that's normally there. We just want people to know that. And again, our board does recognize and celebrate apprenticeship programs as well. We just wanted to be clear around that. And this, I guess, my last question that I would have is, what is the impact on the school district in terms of the capital project? If we can just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'll take that. Obviously, the community knows that this project is a phase project. We're completing phase 2 with the field work here at the campus. We're in the process of designing phase 3, and then there's 2 additional phases, 4 and 5, that are down the road a bit. Because, as Mathis said earlier, the school district is going to be paying for this remedial work out of the current proceeds of the capital project that was voted in 2018, $63.1 million project. Obviously, the project could be impacted in some way. So we've already started that process, looking at those future phases, particularly phase 4 and 5, which is additional work on this campus site, 5 and 10 years down the road, to complete the remaining physical education, PE, and other components of the scope. We're starting to look at those and look at, are there ways to maintain those educational and physical education programs with an alternate design at less cost? Are there some of those things that could be prioritized and potentially bid as alternates and maybe have to be eliminated depending on the final cost of the remediation? And again, as Craig mentioned, we aren't going to have an answer to that question until we really get through this initial phase of figuring out. The budget's $5.6 million, but we all hope that's a worst case scenario, and we hope that it's going to be significantly less than that with some of the testing and other design options we're exploring right now to reduce the amount of material that has to be remediated, treated, and hauled off site. So that's where we are right now.
All right. So let me thank both. As we end today's discussion, I want to thank both Jim and Craig for all of their assistance today. Gentlemen, thank you very much for all of your efforts today.
Our pleasure.
Welcome.
Secondly, let me share that there are some additional information items that we've placed on the district's website for our community to view. On our main webpage, you will find a link to the Capital Improvement Project. Community members should click on that link, which will lead to our capital project page, or you can just go directly to the webpage at oswego.org/capital project. On that page are several resources. The first is a letter to the community which discusses this concern. The second is a frequently asked questions document. And the third item is a copy of this video for our community to view again if you wish to. Also on this webpage is a soil answer and question link where community members can list any questions or concerns they might have about this project for the Board of Education or myself to answer. All community members are welcome to place their questions or concerns there, and a response will be provided shortly thereafter. As we end this video, let me end by again sharing several information items. Number one, in terms of the site, you need to know that it has been secured. Our community and families can help in our efforts, and we ask for its assistance in supervising your children and avoiding the area. Number three, we ask that all families please communicate to your families the importance of obeying signage and structures erected to keep individuals out. Further updates will be posted to the Oswego City School District website as they become available. And should you have any additional questions, certainly you can reach out to us. And with that said, let me thank everyone again for your time, for your efforts, and your support with this matter. We will be in touch very soon again with additional information. Thanks everyone, and please enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.